Okay. Okay, good morning. I really want to talk about this menorah that's hanging over here on top of the Chazan Stender. And what it has to, what do you say? With the spelling mistake. I want to talk about that menorah, but it's gonna take us a while to get there. And I want to first share a very, very random racist ideology that exists in the world and what it might have to do with this menorah. In the early 1900s, like 1910, 1920, 1930, there was an ideology in the USSR, in Russia, that believed in mysticism for Goyim. It believed in all sorts of Kabbalahs and Sfiras, and there was all these, it was like a crossover between mathematics and science and racism and shtusim, all mixed into one. And there was this whole school of Russian, intelligentsia, the smart people, all the scientists and the chshuvim, who had this whole philosophy of mysticism, esoteric mysticism that they believed in and how it ran the world. Ad kedei kach that you could look now, still today, there's something called esoteric Nazism, which basically believes that Hitler was a lot of it is similar to the Aseres HaShvatim and the Sambatyon and few Mashiachs, and a lot of it you'd see very similarities to things you've heard or been exposed to in your life. But Ad kedei kach, there's something called esoteric Nazism, where Hitler was one of the Gulgulim of Mashiach, and there's more of them coming, and he was misunderstood, and etc. There's people today in Russia still, there's a big Putin backer in the war with Ukraine. His name is Alexander Gogin, I think. His daughter was blown up in a car bomb in Moscow a few years ago. He's a big believer in this philosophy. It was a popular philosophy that existed in the early 1900s. Now, one of the main yesodis of the philosophy was that there was once a country or a civilization called Hyperborea. Hyperborea was like a super sophisticated civilization that existed already. They may even have had nuclear power, they might have had phones, they might have had watches. There's lots of different conspiracy theories about it. And this, marvelous civilization existed thousands of years ago before the rest of the world caught on. Then something terrible happened and the civilization disappeared. Some sort of nuclear accident happened, the civilization disappeared, and they disbanded into two small groups. One of them went to Mongolia or Tibet, and one of them went elsewhere. And a lot of these scientists were doing similar to people who go on Aseres HaShvatim expeditions, were going on expeditions to try to track down the missing tribe, the missing civilization of Hyperborea. They went to the Mongolian steppe. It's a very inhospitable climate, and they would try to find them. And one of the main riots that they had, that this existed, is that they would buy rocks. Amber is like a type of old rock that preserves fossils in it. And the bugs that were preserved in the amber that they were buying were bugs that could only live in a warmer climate. And as far as the Russians knew, it was cold, from them to that direction. So they assumed there must have once been a civilization that had a different climate, that was able to host different species. All sorts of, it's crazy conspiracy theories. B'seich, this conspiracy theory is obviously the one that Jews were involved in Hyperborea, and Jews ran the world, and Jews still have secret symbols and secret ways to attach themselves to this old civilization, to this old society, to control the world with it. Now, one of the big proponents of this philosophy, of this thing, was a guy by the name of Alexander Bortnichenko. He was a professor, a regular guy. He was a professor in the St. Petersburg University in Moscow in the 1920s. And he had a huge marach. He had lots of ideas, philosophies. He made several trips to Mongolia to try to find these people. He was a interesting fellow. He really believed in this whole philosophy very deeply. Now, in 1925, he reaches out to the 6th Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rebbe Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, the Riyatz, and he sends him 300 ruble, which was a lot of money, together with a letter, asking him if you could please take the time to share with me the special, powerful secrets that are hidden in the Magen David symbol. And by Magen David, he meant the inverted star, the six-cornered star that's now on the Israeli flag. It wasn't on the Israeli flag yet. That's now on the Israeli flag. He sent him money, and he said, if you could please explain to me, al pi Chasidus and Kabbalah, what type of secrets and powers is hidden in this symbol, because I've become aware that there's great mystical power hidden in the symbol, and it connects to these ancient societies that no longer exist. and I come in peace. I want nothing from you. And as a show of goodwill, here's money. If you could please just explain it to me. And the Riyats who lived under communist Russia, after 1918, Russia became communist, and he was being watched closely. So he was terrified. He didn't know what this could be about. He writes, the Riyat Scribe has a book, sefer, that he wrote about his tkufa in the USSR, under communist Russia. And in it he writes, when I got this 300 ruble, I became terribly fearful that this was a setup of some kind and something bad would come from this. He says, I mailed back the 300 ruble to Alexander Bodanchenko without even deducting money for the post. Meaning it cost me 5 ruble to mail it back to him. I mailed it back. I paid for post out of my own pocket. Shalayim Rabris. They shouldn't be able to say that I took anything, I did anything. I mailed it right back to him, he says. He says, over the next few weeks and months, Bodanchenko writes him again, impassioned plea, many letters, impassioned pleas that I come in peace, I want nothing from you, I'm not trying to set you up, I'm not trying to do anything, I just want to know what the secret is, until finally, after a few months, the Riyats, is maskim, and he says, but I don't write Russian, I don't know how to write Russian, so I'm going to put you in touch with my son-in-law, the future 7th Rebbe of Lubavitcher, and this is why we have some of these letters preserved. In Chabad's vast library of Igros Kodesh, we have a lot of these letters preserved. He's able to read and write Russian, and you'll ask me whatever questions you want. I'll discuss with him the relevant passages in Hasidus or Kabbalah. He'll translate them into Russian, and he'll send them to you. And during that whole time, that whole correspondence, Alexander Bodanchenko sent a small stipend, not a big bribe, a small stipend to pay, administrative fees that it costed. That he was getting, he was treating the Rebbe as like a research library, so he was paying him a small fee to use him as a research library. Now, ultimately, he sends him his questions about the significance of the Magen David, the inverted stars, to which the Riyats replies to him that it is of no significance. It comes from nowhere, he says. It has no meaning. It's certainly not uniquely Jewish, and it's nothing. You're barking up the wrong tree. You've become convinced of a delusion that has nothing to do. He says, the Riyats writes, it's interesting, he writes, I'm not a Welt Talmud Chacham, he says, but Hasidus I know a little bit, and Hasidus is Kabbalah. So in Hasidus and Kabbalah, I can tell you that there's nothing here. There's no special meaning to this symbol, this Magen David that you're asking me about. Eventually, Bodanchenko persists. He says, I know you don't always tell the truth to non-Jews. You're protecting the secret. He finally agrees that there's nothing here and there's nothing to be gleaned from the Riyats about the significance of the Magen David. Now, this story has two endings. They're not really relevant to us, but just the Lahashlam Advarim. In 1936, Joseph Stalin has a great purge, where he purges all, doctors and professors, anyone who he thinks is counter-revolutionary, who could lead the people not buying into the full communist ideology. And amongst them, Alexander Bodanchenko is brought to prison and has a mock trial and is sentenced to death and is unceremoniously executed by gunshot in 1938. We have his mugshot, from when he was brought to prison, and he's killed for these hashkafas, for these ideas of Hyperbora and all these, crazy ideas that he has. Now, in 1927, in July of 1927, the Riyats is arrested. The 6th Lubavitcher Rebbe gets arrested. Now, this is not unique to Chabad for the Rebbes to get arrested. It's very common. But a lot of them were mastered on, some of them even by our people, by the non-Hasidim. But the Riyats was hauled in based on some lapsed Chabad Hasidim, some former Chabad Hasidim who became part of the Yeskevtsia, the Russian religious police. And they haul him in and they give him a whole lange rap sheet of charges. They bring him in, they don't let him take any stuff, they search his house. He writes it in great detail. If anyone's interested, you could read it. He writes the story of his arrest and his trial and his interrogation. But Beini, in the charging documents that the Russian government brings against him, this is the part that was interesting to me. The guy who was interviewing him was a Jew, and not from Jew. His name was Lulav, actually, and he writes the Riyats writes this down. He says, "What is this correspondence that you have with Bodanchenko about Hasidus? You're obviously trying to sow Hasidus and teach the Russian population about Hasidus to try to overturn the revolution. That's clearly what you're doing." So the Riyats responds. He says, in regards to the correspondence with Bodanchenko, he somehow is of the opinion that the Magen David symbol express profound Kabbalistic concepts, and the mastery of this knowledge would be a source of great power. He says somehow Baron Checo became convinced that the Magen David is able to unlock, nuclear fission. It could do who knows what. He says 4 years ago during Sukkot, he turned to me as an authority in Kabbalah and requested that I reveal the esoteric meaning of the Magen David. I tried to convince him that he had succumbed to an illusion, for nothing is to be found in Chassidus about the great power inherent in the Magen David. Empty-handed, he continued to send me until finally I instructed my son-in-law, v'chulu v'chulu, and he says, I wrote to him, there's nothing here, and I want nothing from him. And then later on, he brings, in this book, they found the interrogation documents that the Russian government became public many years later, made public from the NKVD, and it's a very exact description of the conversation, where they ask him about his seditious conversation with Barynchenko, and he says it was nothing, it was about a Magen David, it was about an illusion about a Magen David that doesn't exist. And they ask him, so why did you take money from him? What's the money? So no, he insisted on sending me money to pay for my time and effort as research, but there's nothing here, I promise you there's nothing here. So now, Shema Taimar, that the Riyatz is saying there's nothing here in the Magen David just because there's taka so much here in the Magen David, and he didn't want to share it with Barynchenko. So it's pavos that the Lubavitcher Rebbe, the 7th Lubavitcher Rebbe, was very makbid that no Chabad shul anywhere in the world could have a Magen David. He said it's not a Jewish symbol, it's nothing, leave it alone, it doesn't belong here. So he taka held like this, Bizim Seif. So where taka does a symbol called the Magen David come from? Does the idea of a Magen David being a symbol come from? So, L'maisa, there is no real source from Jewish sources that say that a Magen David is special to us. You could find, if you look in ancient architecture, you'll find Magen Davids in Islam, you'll find them in Christianity, you'll find them by Jews. It's a very pleasing mathematical shape. When you invert, two triangles, it creates a lot of parallel shapes. It's pleasing, and it was something that was commonly used in different architectural motifs, like throughout the world. The way it became, more popular to Jews is because in the 1300s in Prague, the Kehila was allowed. They got permission from the king to have their own flag, and for whatever reason, they chose on the flag that the symbol should be a Magen David, and therefore Magen David became associated with European Jews. And when different rulers of Jews wanted to make Jews, stamp themselves like Hitler and wear a symbol, a mark, they chose the star. So the yellow star became the six-pointed star, and when the Zionists were looking for a symbol that was associated with Jews, they chose the star, and ultimately by now it just became a symbol that's associated with Jews, although it carries no special meaning. It doesn't mean anything unique or special to Yiddishkeit. So what is the actual Magen David? What is the real Magen David? So now, first of all, when we most of the time when it says Magen David in Psukim or in Nevi'im or in Tefillah, Magen David refers to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's not an object. It refers to Hashem. Hashem is the Magen David. Hashem is the protector of David HaMelech. It doesn't refer to an object. It refers to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But there is a mascaras that it's referred to as an object, and that's why I want to talk about this menorah. So let's start this way, and this is what it has to do with Sfiras HaOmer. The Shulchan Aruch and Siman Taf Peites brings down the whole Seder of Sfiras HaOmer, how one is supposed to count it. Now, Afanart, there's a Magen Avram. It's one line at the end of the Magen Avram. The Magen Avram says, Yesh noeg in loymar, mizmar alekim yechenenenu achar Sfira. There is a minig, he says, to say the capital of alekim yechenenenu after Sfira. Now, if you read that, the capital that's in there is the capital Samach Zayin in Tehillim, which is the capital of alekim yechenenenu. That's the capital that's in there. Now, the Magen Avram brings it as just a cryptic line, Yesh to say alekim yechenenenu, without going into detail about the way it's set up, the tzura, the meaning. He doesn't talk at all, just one line, a throwaway line, Yesh Now, the Chok Yaakov, Afanart, and Hilchos Sfiras HaOmer, is very troubled by this. He brings down this Magen Avram. He says, "Noyig in leimer lekim yechenenenu v'kein kasav Magen Avram v'chadashim mikarav bo." People doing new things have showed up on the scene. V'tfisu nusach hasfira al piseid v'kavanas hasfiras. They've instituted saying Sfiras HaOmer with kavanas and say this. K'agavna ba'akafas b'lulav. The same thing that they do by akafas with lulav. Oimrim psukim al say the kavanas harizal v'chinidva say that tefillah imavei the sabayra. K'agavna says they've added all sorts of tefillas and meanings and cheshbainis and things to Sfiras HaOmer and to lulav. He says be'emes. He says k'agavna harbi likutim mekubalim and espashit davar zeh be'enei hamoin. And this minig became very, very public and well known in the eyes of the simple people. As if anybody who wants to come engage in like Kabbalistic shemis could just come and do it. It's no kavod for HaKadosh Baruch Hu to have foolish people engaging in kavanas and things that they don't understand, says the Chok Yaakov. The kavod for Hashem is to keep this hidden. V'atik, and then he brings a tshuva from the Marshal. The Marshal famously in Tshuva Tzadik Chas, we've actually quoted a snippet of it a different time, goes on a whole, how Kabbalah is not for the masses, etc., etc. So the Chok Yaakov was very troubled by this addition, this institution of adding Elikim Yechanenenu to Sfiras Eimer. Likewise, the Gaon in Maiserav, the Gaon writes, they write very clearly that the Gaon was makbid. Sfira was said simply. He said the bracha with the Sfira, with the Hiratzin Sheibanu Beis HaMikdash, and nothing more. That was the Gaon's minhag in Sfira, because the Gaon held this is not for everyone. This is not, these Kabbalistic additions are not for the Hamoinam to say by Sfira. Now, the Aruch HaShulchan Lamashal, who's much, much later, he writes almost kind of wistfully. He brings the Magen Avram, he brings the rebuttal from the Chok Yaakov, and then he writes, but the Achshav, Kvarnespashat HaMinig, and the minig is to say it, Behis Lahavas Ubetzibur Gadol. Like, that ship has sailed. The Aruch HaShulchan writes, like, the ship has sailed. The minig Quran, it is what it is. Same Mishabura again brings it without any vitriol, no negativity. Mishabura brings the minig, there's a minig to say it, and that's it. Because by the time Mishabura and the Aruch HaShulchan were writing, this minig was already well instituted, and there was no, it was out. That's it, the minig was out. The cat was out of the bag. Now, so the Magen Avram doesn't bring a source, he just says, Yesh Noyeg and Leimer. Now, for the longest time, the earliest source that the Olam knew of, that was considered the source was from the Akedah. The Akedas Yitzchak is a sefer. It's written on Chumash, but it's be'etzem a sefer that has like everything in it. It's a cumbersome sefer. It's hard to use for this reason, because it's written on Chumash with Hanafim and Simanim. But the Akedah is like a quasi-Rishon, I guess. The Akedah lived right at the end of Spanish Jewry. He actually was kicked out of Spain in 1492. He travels to Italy. He dies in Italy. Rebbe Yitzchak Arama, he writes a sefer called Akedas Yitzchak. It's a huge work. Now, incidentally, in Siman Samach Zayin in the Akedah, which is the same number as the capital, but totally a coincidence, not for that reason, in Siman Samach Zayin in the Akedah, he's the first one to bring this school or this Kabbalistic idea of saying this capital of Elikim Yechaninenu after Sfira, and he explains it as follows. And I'll read you some of his words. He explains it as follows. Says the Akedah like this. He says he says as follows. I have something, he says, that's Ba Kabbalah. I know this Kabbalah, it's Ba Kabbalah Liyadi. And he says it's to say this capital, Samach Zayin, after Sfira. And I'll explain to you why, he says. He says as follows. He says, Tziyurei, V'hine l'daiti, Sayd HaKosav Hazeh, these psukim, V'tzayrecha en yanam ha-miyuchasim el ha-smoil, L'siyu ha-pulas ha-yimin, V'tzirasam v'tavnisam, Tziyura Meneshim v'mizmer nichpa d'mu'ula. This mizmer, this idea, it's a whole marach he has over there about the koiches of right and left, Al-Pi Kabbalah, which maybe if we have time we'll touch on in a second. But he writes, this is all encapsulated in this capital, this mizmer of Tehillim, of Elikim Yechaninenu, and it's written in a very special way. He says, Hayaminig la'omer b'mei asfira. There was a minig that I'm aware of to say it during the Yemei Asfira, which is Tehillim Samach Zayin, Sheba b'Kabbalah, Shehu Mitzuyer. I have b'Kabbalah that the way it's written, and here's the kicker, b'Magen David Kidmus Menorah. This is the first time we have in a sefer referring to Magen David. It has absolutely nothing to do with the six-pointed star. It has to do with this. Shehu b'Magen David, Mitzuyer b'Magen David, Kidmus Menorah. The way this capital is written down, the school of this capital, is Mitzurian and Magen David B'Nusa Menorah. He says, Shleish Shekani Menorah Mitzad Echad, 3 branches of the menorah on one side, 3 branches on the other side, and you go downward. Elikim Yechaninenu starts on the right, and the Psukim go down, you count them down on Das Aretz, Shleish Shekani Menorah on the other side, and he counts them down, and you say all these menorah, all these capitals. Now says the Akedah, why is this capital so connected to Sfira? He says this capital has 7 Psukim, like the 7 weeks of Sfira. It's comprised of 49 words, like the 49 days of the Eimer. The longest capital, which is the middle branch of the menorah, which is more words than the rest of them, is comprised. The longest pasuk of the 7 psukim is 49 words, 49 letters. Now, rather than some nuschayos, it's not, because of a malach chaser problem, but it's 49 letters. So this capital is very, very bound up in the inyanim of Sfira, in the seidus of Sfiras Eimer. And the way to say it, he says, is Betzuras Magen David, Kitzuras HaMenorah. Now, the Akedah continues, he goes on a big arichas about this, but there's a few nakudas just to drive this home. Aleph is that the Marshal, who's the Mechaber of Yam Shel Shleima, and Isav Heter, the Marshal has a kuntras. Today it's printed in the back of Shut Marshal, called Menorah Zav Tar, where the Marshal also brings this menorah and brings the school to say it on Sfira, and he took the time to be mitzayer the menorah for us in exactly the manner that he feels it should be, and he writes the skula of saying this menorah after Sfiras Ha'omer, and he says that this menorah, here, I just want to read you what he says. He writes about the tremendous schoolis of this menorah, the kavanas for it. Now, you just have to keep in mind, the marshal to write the schoolis of the menorah, in my mind, maybe I'm wrong, in my mind it'd be like Rabbi Yashav writing a kuntres on the right to Bendel. It's so out of left field. The marshal is not one given to these, but clearly the marshal felt that this skula was a big skula that had a grace of shmiras inherent in it, and it's a school that's built on Sfiras Ha'omer. And he also writes, he calls it, I could find it in here, he writes, he calls it again, the school of the Magen David, he writes. I just have to find it for you. It's in here somewhere. Amongst when he discusses the kavanas and the milas of the skula, he writes the school of the Magen David HaMatzuri K'Mimener, and he writes more specifically that David HaMelech, he says, when he would go out to battle, had on the inside of his shield, he had these psukim written down, this kapitel Tehillim written down in this surah like a menorah on the inside of his shield, and he would go to battle, he would look at these psukim or say these psukim in this special surah, and with that he was able to be menatzeach. So here you have the marshal referring to the Magen David the way we have Magen David in our collective conscience. Magen David is like a battle instrument. It's not a Kadosh Baruch Hu, the Magen David, it's like the Magen David, a battle instrument. But it means something totally different. It means the menorah that David HaMelech had there, these kapitel Tehillim that were written inside his shield. Now, Mamash Stam, this is just for interest's sake. I'll share this with you. It's a legend. It's hard to say, to believe it, to not believe it. For many years, the first person who was considered to be the originator of this skula for Sfiras Ha'omer was the Akedah. Now, the Akedah, if we notice, I read his words out. The Akedah writes, "It's Baba Kabbalah b'yadi." The Akedah writes, "This is not mine. This is something I know. Al pi Kabbalah, I have Messiah. That this is what you're supposed to say Sfiras Ha'omer time." Now, the Akedah lived in Spain, like we said before the Girush in 1492. He learned by Talmidim of the Ramban. That's his Seder Messiah, his Rebbeim. Now, the Ramban we don't have anywhere in writing that the Ramban discusses this school. The Ramban has plenty of Kabbalah throughout the Kisvei Ramban, but he doesn't discuss this skula of the menorah, the Magen David, this manner. Now, in Tafshin Samach Aleph, they found the Ksav Yad of the Rekeach from Germany that was never published yet. In the Rekeach, from this Ksav Yad that they published in Tafshin Samach Aleph, over there, the Rekeach talks about the school of menorah. And the Rekeach writes the same thing. The Magen David, the school of menorah, all the calculations to say it, Ahina Her. Now, I'll just share this. It's a legend, the Messiah you could call it, a legend that exists. The Sefer Shalshalas HaKabbalah brings down that when the Ramban became Roy and Mukhshar to start learning Kabbalah, he was living in Spain where there was no one who could teach him the Kabbalah. And Kaidua, Kabbalah has to be, Ish mi Piyish, Rab mi Pitalmud. It's not something you can teach yourself. And Kaviyachal, a heavenly PSA went out. Is there anyone available to come teach the Ramban Kabbalah? And the Rekeach, far away where he was in Germany, became aware of this, heavenly desire that the Ramban should be taught Kabbalah, and the Shalshalas HaKabbalah brings down that the Rekeach's Neshama, I don't know if this is physical, the Rekeach's Neshama took on the challenge of going to travel to teach the Ramban Kabbalah, and the Rekeach went and shared the Kabbalah that he was working on with the Ramban. So even though, as far as we know, the Rekeach and the Ramban never saw each other, they lived far away from each other, maybe didn't even know of each other's existence, there is many similarities between the Kabbalah of the Ramban and the Kabbalah of the Rekeach. So there are those who suggest that their true origin of this Mizmor, the Magen David, Mizmor Lekim Yechanunenu that we say after Sfira, that's in the Tzuras HaMenorah, really stems from this Rekeach that we only found out later on, that was B'Ksav Yad. And the Rebbe Aramah, the Akedah, knew it from his Rebbeim through the Ramban and knew it from the Rekeach. Now, I share this just, I don't know, it's been said. It's not mine, so I'll share it. It's been said. Do with it what you want. So this menorah, this is like the real Magen David. Now, others, there's been a country someone put out to try to find the source of the Magen David, and after knocking away everyone else's, Tifa Kavanas, that it has to do with 6 sides, or it has to do with Hashem is everywhere, it has to do with. He goes through, it's rather interesting to see the things that people ascribe to the Magen David, the pointed star, range literally from being a symbol of peace for the whole world, to being a battle weapon, to being it's mamish ranges, because when there is no set meaning, anybody could literally come up with whatever they want in it. But the real Magen David, it seems, Al Kapanim from the Rishonim, the real Magen David, the symbol Magen David that we refer to, is this mizmor of the menorah that David HaMelech had Metzoyer inside of his shield. Now, just one more nakuda about this mizmor. If you'll notice, the way we have it, I believe, over here, and the way it is in most Sidurim today, is written, Elikim Yechenenenu, the pasuk starts on the right side. The beginning of the capital starts on the right side of the menorah. If you look in the marshals that I brought here, I don't know if you'll be able to see it from there, but if you look in the marshals Elikim Yechenenenu starts on the left side. Now, it's hard to know, the marshal doesn't write specifically that he believes it's supposed to start on the left side. So it could be that just the printer, inverted it and wrote it that way. It's not muchach that the marshal held that way, lahadya, but the Akedah spends a lot of time explaining why the mizmor of Elikim Yechenenenu is very important that it should be written right to left. And without going into it in too much detail, he writes, obviously in Kabbalah and Sfiris, there's a big difference between the right side and the left side, and the right and the right is supposed to be Moshel on top of the left. It's supposed to lead the left, Leiv Chacham Liyaminai, which means the Leiv Chacham is supposed to lead everything the Chacham does, and therefore it's important that this mizmor, this capital, should be written like Elikim Yechenenenu, right to left, from the right side, not like it's written in the Marshal. Now, Seif David Merishisa, to go back to Chabad for 1 second, the Chabad has a world-class library that they have and that they were Yerush from the previous Rebbes. In there, the crown jewel that Chabad has in there is a Siddur B'Ksav Yad that the Baal Shem Tov used. They have the Baal Shem Tov Siddur that they got. They bought it. One of the Rebbes bought it later on. In the Baal Shem Tov Siddur, handwritten, the mizmor of Elikim Yechenenenu is right to left, the proper way. Like and that there's no printer involved. There's no printer you could say who inverted, didn't print. That's written by a Jew, handwritten, not the Baal Shem Tov himself, but written by a Jew, handwritten for the Baal Shem Tov, and that's written right to left, the way the Akedah wants it. Grab just once more on right and left. Rav Chaim Kanievsky Kaidu has a kuntris called Ish Iter, right, about halachas of someone who's a lefty. It's in Masechtas Tefillin, on his beer on the Masechtas Ktanis, in Masechtas Tefillin, when the halacha is brought down about Iter Yad, Rav Chaim says, once I'm on Iter Yad, let me talk about the inyan of right versus left for a minute. And he has a short hakdama, it's 2 pages, and Rav Chaim generally doesn't talk anything Kabbalistic. He has a 2-page hakdama over there, and he breaks it down into 7 or 8 categories of right versus left. There's right versus left because of the stronger hand. There's right because of left because of nature. If physical, your heart is on the left side, and that's by all humans, and that has nothing to do with being righty or lefty. So there's organs that are on the right side. And then he says there's right over left versus because of Yamin Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Hashem's right side, whatever that means. He says there's right versus left because of Sfiris. He breaks it down into different categories, and it's Yedua. The Stipler used to tell people not to hold their hands like this, not to interlock their hands, where you're bringing the left and the right and you're interlocking them together. That's not appropriate. You're supposed to do right over left, because right is supposed to control the left. So in this Kabbalistic symbol, this Magen David, there's a lot of extra zachem that I don't in the Asik from the stars b'chlal, but I just thought it's interesting to share that the Magen David is l'chayra not what we think it is, and it is the menorah that's instituted today by Sfira, like the Magen Avraham says, and like the Aruch HaShulchan writes, that today it's a minig that caught on widely. I don't know if it's so popular people say it today or don't say it, but it's a widely dispersed minig in Klal Yisrael. Okay, we'll hold it here.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.